Story: The Shadow in the Hotel Room. In 2016, I took a business trip to Denver. I was booked in an old hotel downtown, one of those places that had been around for over 100 years. The lobby was beautiful, full of antique furniture and chandeliers, but the moment I stepped inside, I felt uneasy. I should have trusted my instincts, because something was waiting for me in that room. The room at the end of the hall. When I checked in, the front desk clerk gave me my key with a strange hesitation. "You're in room 803, she said. And then, almost as an afterthought, "If you hear anything strange, just ignore it." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She forced a smile. "Oh, it's just an old building. The pipes make noise, that's all." She was lying. I took the elevator up, feeling more uneasy with every step down the long, dimly lit hallway. My room was at the very end, and as I slid the key into the lock, I swore I heard something shuffle inside. Something is in here with me. The room was cold, not just a little chilly, freezing, like someone had left a window open in the dead of winter. But everything was shut tight. I turned on all the lights, trying to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That night, I barely slept. At exactly 3:12 a.m., I woke up to a sound, a whisper, right by my ear. "Get out!" I bolted upright, heart pounding. The room was empty, but when I looked toward the bathroom mirror, my stomach dropped. The reflection didn't match the room. The bed behind me wasn't empty. The man in the corner. I didn't move. I couldn't. In the mirror, I could see the dark shape of a man standing in the corner, just beyond my bed. But when I turned around, nothing. I was alone. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it into every corner of the room. Nothing was there. But the moment I turned the light off, the bathroom door creaked open. The shadow that followed me. I grabbed my things and left, checking out at 4 a.m. The night clerk barely even blinked when I told him I was leaving early. "Was it the man in the corner?" he asked. I just stared at him. He sighed. "You're not the first." I never stayed in that hotel again, but sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I still see that shadow in the corner of my room. Story: The Woman in the Keyhole. When I was in college, I worked as a night receptionist at a small hotel just outside of town. It was an old two-story building with a history of strange occurrences. Guests would complain about whispers in empty hallways, furniture moving on its own, and the feeling of being watched. I didn't believe in ghosts until the night I checked a woman into room 109. The woman who never came out. It was a quiet Wednesday night when she arrived. She was tall, pale, and dressed in a long black coat. She didn't carry any luggage. "Room 109, please," she said, her voice low and emotionless. That was strange. Most guests didn't request specific rooms, but I gave her the key, and she walked down the hallway without a word. The next morning, her key was still on the counter. She had never turned it in. I checked the computer. No one had left room 109 all night. The red eye in the keyhole around noon. Housekeeping knocked on her door. No answer. They knocked again. Still nothing. Finally, the head maid used her master key and pushed the door open. The room was empty. The bed was untouched. The bathroom light was still on. But the room smelled strange, like rusted metal. The only thing out of place, the old keyhole in the door, which had been stuffed with something wet. The maid screamed when she pulled it out. It was a human eye. The truth about room 109. The police were called, but there was no sign of the woman, no security footage of her ever leaving the building. That's when my manager finally told me the truth. Years ago, a woman had been murdered in room 109. Her boyfriend, in a jealous rage, had stabbed her and left her eye in the keyhole before disappearing. The killer was never found. And ever since, guests in room 109 had reported the same thing. At night, if you knelt by the door and looked through the keyhole, you would see a single bloodshot red eye staring back. Story: The Thing in the Woods. In 2014, my friend Daniel and I went on a weekend camping trip deep in the Appalachian Mountains. We were experienced hikers, so we weren't worried about being so far from civilization. That was our first mistake, because something was out there with us, and it didn't want us to leave. The whistling in the night. We set up camp near a small creek, miles from the nearest road. As the sun set, we sat by the fire, drinking beers and swapping ghost stories. Around midnight, we heard it, a whistle, low and slow, coming from somewhere in the trees. Daniel laughed. Probably just the wind. Then it happened again, and this time, it was closer. The footsteps in the dark. We turned off our lanterns and listened. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Footsteps moving just beyond the tree line, circling us. "Hello?" I called out. No response. Then from the opposite direction, another whistle. Low, slow, mocking. Something walked into our camp. Daniel grabbed his flashlight and shined it into the trees. Nothing. Just darkness. We sat in terrified silence, listening as the footsteps moved closer. Then our fire went out. Not slowly, like a dying flame, but all at once, like something had smothered it. And in the darkness, we heard breathing, low, heavy, right behind us. We ran for our lives. We didn't think. We just ran. We left everything. Our tent, our bags, even the keys to the truck. We sprinted through the trees, branches slashing at our arms, our own footsteps drowned out by the sound of something chasing us. It never ran. It just walked, slow, deliberate, like it knew we had nowhere to go. The thing that watched us leave. We finally reached the road at dawn. A passing car picked us up and took us to a ranger station. When we returned with a search team later that day, our campsite was untouched. The tent was still standing. The firewood was still stacked. But there was one thing we hadn't left behind. Footprints. Deep, inhuman footprints surrounding our campsite. And in the dirt, written in perfect letters. "Come back! Story." The Smiling Man. In 2012, I was living in a small apartment in Seattle. I worked late shifts at a bar downtown, meaning I often walked home alone around 3 a.m. The streets were usually empty at that hour, except for one night. That was the night I met the Smiling Man. A man who shouldn't be there. It was a quiet night, cold and misty. As I turned onto my street, I saw a man standing under a streetlight. He was tall, impossibly thin, and wearing a suit that didn't fit right. Too short at the wrists, too tight in the chest, and he was smiling. Not a normal smile, a wide, stretched grin, too big for his face. I tried to ignore him and walked faster. Then he started moving. He was dancing. He wasn't walking, he was dancing. Weird, jerky movements, like a puppet with its strings cut. His legs twisted and kicked in unnatural ways as he glided toward me. I felt sick just watching him. Then he stopped, tilted his head, and started running. The chase I bolted. My heart pounded as I sprinted toward my apartment, too scared to look back. I could hear him behind me, his shoes scraping against the pavement. Then, silence. I reached my building, yanked the door open, and slammed it behind me. I finally turned around. Through the glass door, standing perfectly still in the middle of the street, the smiling man. His face pressed against the glass, grinning. Then in a slow, twisted motion, he bowed. He's still out there. I never saw him again, but sometimes late at night, when I'm alone on a quiet street, I feel like someone is watching. And if I ever see a man standing under a streetlight, grinning just a little too wide, I don't look back. I just run. Story: The Man in the Storm. It happened in the winter of 2007. I was living alone in a small cabin deep in the woods of Montana. No neighbors for miles, just endless trees and the occasional howling of wolves in the distance. It was exactly the isolation I wanted until the night of the storm. That was the night he knocked on my door. The knock at midnight. The snowstorm had been raging for hours. The wind screamed through the trees, and the power had gone out, leaving me in complete darkness. I was sitting by the fireplace, wrapped in blankets, when I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. A slow, deliberate knocking at my front door. I froze. No one should be out in this storm. No cars could get through the snow, and the nearest town was over 10 miles away. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously approached the door. Knock, knock, knock. Louder this time. I took a deep breath and peeked through the window, and that's when I saw him. The man with no face. A figure stood just beyond the porch light, tall, thin, wearing an old tattered coat that barely covered his frame. His skin was pale, almost bluish from the cold. But the worst part, his face was wrong. His features were blurred, like a smudged painting. I couldn't make out his eyes, his nose, his mouth. Just a vague impression of a human face. He lifted a hand, pressing it against the glass, and in a voice that wasn't quite human, he whispered, "Let me in." The thing that shouldn't exist. Every instinct in my body screamed no. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, as the knocking grew frantic. Knock, 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 knock. I grabbed my rifle from the wall, aimed at the door, and shouted, "Go away!" Silence. For a long time there was nothing but the sound of the wind. I slowly lowered the gun. Then, my back door creaked open. It got inside. I whirled around. The back door was wide open, snow blowing in. I knew I had locked it. The air inside the cabin felt wrong, colder than outside. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. Something was in there with me. A whisper echoed through the cabin, coming from everywhere at once. "Let me in." I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, ran outside into the snow, and never looked back. The cabin was empty, but not alone. The next morning, I returned with a friend. We found the cabin just as I had left it, except for one thing. The inside of every window was covered in handprints. Handprints that weren't mine. I moved out that week, and to this day, when a storm rolls in and the wind howls through the trees, I swear I can still hear the knocking. Story: The reflection that wasn't mine. In 2019, I moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of Chicago. It wasn't anything special, just a cheap one-bedroom place with old wooden floors and a single large mirror in the hallway. I never thought much about that mirror until the night it moved on its own. The first time it happened, I was brushing my teeth, my bedroom light the only glow in the dark apartment. As I walked past the hallway mirror, something felt off. I turned back to look. For a moment, my reflection was a step behind. Not much, just a fraction of a second, but enough that I noticed. I laughed it off, thinking I was just tired. Then it did it again. The reflection that watched me. Over the next few nights, the mirror got worse. Sometimes when I walked past, I could swear my reflection was smiling, even when I wasn't. Other times I'd glance at it and see both of my arms at my sides, but in the reflection, one was raised, like it was trying to get my attention. The night it stepped out one night, I woke up to a sound, a soft, slow tapping. I sat up, groggy and confused. The room was dark, silent except for the occasional creak of the floorboards. Then I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. Coming from the hallway mirror, I grabbed my phone and shined the flashlight toward it, and I saw something move, not in the reflection, inside the glass. A shadow shifting just beneath the surface, as if something was trapped on the other side. Then, as I watched in horror, a handprint appeared on the glass from the inside. The last time I looked, I didn't sleep that night. I packed a bag and left before sunrise, crashing at a friend's place. The next day, I hired a moving service. I didn't even go back inside. I just told them to grab my things and bring them to my new apartment. But when they arrived, they called me, confused. "Are you sure you lived here?" one of them asked. "What do you mean?" I asked. "The place is empty. There's nothing here." Everything I owned, my bed, my clothes, my furniture, was gone, except for one thing, the hallway mirror, still hanging on the wall. And when I went back to see it one last time, the reflection smiled.